Well, we bolted our first section in, as you can see. I have the spacers above that I'll caulk in. All they really do is allow the floor to rest down on something solid, so I'll caulk the top of those in. On the bottom I have a piece of foam insulation to keep the water out, and it compresses when you put it in. I used bolts here that were originally rivets. I was planning on using bolts there to begin with because the steel rivets were just too hard to deal with. And I also used bolts over here against the bulkhead. And I had actually planned to use rivets. In fact, I spent a lot of money on rivets and a rivet tool and all kinds of things, only to find out that the rivets that I got were too big to be driven by a hand tool. I got 5/16 inch diameter because I wanted to move up a 16th and make sure that all these holes were good and solid that hold that bracket on there, and you can't compress them with a hand tool. So I went to the bolts, and it seems to be okay. At least it's on there. And all of our air lines for the brakes and parking brake and leveling valve are reconnected, and all of our tabs you can see that we had welded on are in place to hold in the airbag plates and whatnot. So that piece is in, and we're getting ready to move on to doing the next section with the 5 gussets that hold these together and those spacers and whatnot. We'll come back. All right, now we have the second half of the frame bolted in, and as you can see, it's pretty much nearing completion. I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself, and instead of caulking in that white set of strips on the other side where it just supports the floor, I just have them screwed up, and so I'm a little concerned about all the water getting up in there. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to close in the lower part of the frame with some pieces of mud flaps that I'm going to cut apart and just close these gaps here so the water and the spray and stuff isn't all going up in there. Keep it out. I think it'll help preserve it. On this frame, you can see where I use this specialized gasket, this little red stuff you see squeezing out to keep the water out between the frame rails or the support brackets here and the bulkhead, and the same thing between the frame rail and the bulkhead and the support bracket. So you can see we have all of our gussets bolted in place. We have our joust bumper tower here. I have to put the bumper on the bottom. We have our shock installed, and everything really is pretty much bolted in place. Now we have the airbags to put back in, and these are brake parts here. That's what we got started with, was doing a brake job. We got into this 5-month process here, and you can see that everything else is back in place, including the bracket here for the support for the lines from the front of the bus to the back of the bus. And we have started rebuilding our brakes and putting all new brake parts in. So I'm almost done here with the job, but the biggest part of the frame is completed. So hopefully we'll be back on the road soon. As I said, it's only been 5 months. In case you're interested, I think we spent about $400 in bolts. I had planned to put rivets in there, as I said before, and I spent probably close to $500 on rivets and rivet tools, which I'm hoping to return some of. And we spent about $700, I think, on steel for this project, and then the brakes obviously are a different project, or a different part of the project. But it's coming along, and I'm pretty pleased with the outcome. Alright, so this will probably be my last video on this. I think I have everything completed, as you can see. Everything's bolted up and looking good. The airbags are on now, fully inflated and supporting the weight of the bus, and not much to go. But there were a couple things that I wanted to tell you about and show you about. I used some of the, I'm phobic about rust now, so I didn't want metal surfaces next to each other, and wherever I brazed or welded these plates together, like you can see, this plate is for reinforcement for the shock tower that is hung on the back here, and it tends to pivot back and forth, so I wanted to give some added strength there. And then there's 2 gussets to go across that also add strength to it. The original frame had a big steel plate welded on the outside, so I wanted to give that a little bit of extra boost. But because of the rust problems that I had, I didn't want surfaces like these being next to each other without something in between. So I use this stuff that you get from Home Depot. It's basically a shower liner. It's pretty thin. It's less than 1/16 of an inch thick. And I made little pieces to go in between these places where it's metal to metal mounts. In addition, well, let me just finish that. So I put some here in each of the airbag mounting plates on the top, and I also put them at the base of the airbags because sometimes the cans on the bottom of these things rub against this plate and they rust out, and then that causes a failure of the bag. So in addition to that, I wanted to try to keep the water from going up inside of the cavity up in there. So I took a piece of mud flap like this that you see that I got from Track Auto or whatever it is, AutoZone, and I made little plates that just sort of slide in there, and they will keep most of the water from flying up in there. It won't be, I don't want it sealed tight because I wanted it to be able to drain and dry out for whatever gets in there from wherever else, but I wanted it to be able to keep most of what goes in there. And in addition to that, I silicone caulked around all these spots. On a sort of backyard, it's basically just bathroom caulk. But, you know, it's tough stuff. I use it on my holding tank, and that stuff's been on there forever. So I think this is my final video. I got my joust bumper mounted, and everything looks good. We're ready to move on to the rest of the project, which is where we started, and that's, you know, replacing the brakes. So I hope you enjoyed this series. I plan on putting another series on soon about the actual building of the bus when we did this, and I have to do it from photos that were taken almost 30 years ago, before they had the internet and cell phones and handy cams and all that stuff. So it'll be a little different. Bye now.